What's up, everybody? So today I'm going to be doing this video on how I overcame air hunger. So basically, first thing is, what is air hunger? It's probably not a term that you've heard maybe too many times before. It's not something that I don't know anybody else who really struggles with this. I mean, I've only seen it online. So basically, air hunger is this feeling like you're not getting enough oxygen in your lungs. And it could really happen anytime. It could happen like when you're sitting. For me, in most cases, it would happen upon exertion. And it's this feeling of, even though you're able to breathe like in and out, somehow those breaths just don't feel like air's going in. It's just this sensation of you're just not getting oxygen. And I really wanted to put out this video for other sufferers of air hunger, because it's really a crippling anxiety. I mean, I've dealt with a lot of different anxiety in my lifetime. I've had generalized anxiety disorder. I've had really intense panic attacks. But I'd have to say, like, this particular anxiety / panic attack is really scary, and it's very intense, and it's very crippling at the same time. But I finally have found a way to overcome this type of anxiety. It's taken me about 4 years. It's been a long journey, but now that I've finally discovered this, I wanted to share this with everyone. Now, before I get into this, I do want to mention that I'm not a licensed health professional, and this is simply what has worked for me through my experience, and I'm just hoping that this might be able to help somebody else. But first, I want to kind of get into how this started. So as I said, I've had panic disorders since like my later teenage years. So I'm not new to anxiety and panic attacks, and I went through the stage of having all these panic attacks in my teens to early 20s, and then I overcame that. But then once COVID happened, it just kind of all came back, and then I had this panic disorder again. But it actually started at this one specific moment. So I actually, after COVID happened, I lost my previous job from a few years ago, and I actually was moving back in with my parents. And I remember what happened was, I was like, I think it was a TV or something like that, and I had it in my hand, and I ran up 3 flights of stairs with the TV. And I remember when I got to the top of the stairs, I just had this really weird sensation in my legs, like pins and needles, and it like freaked me out. And I just had this weird feeling of like, I'm not getting enough oxygen right now. I don't know if that was really accurate, but it just triggered my anxiety, and then immediately I started to hyperventilate, and I started to feel like sick, and it's like I felt like I felt like I was gonna have a heart attack. It was there aren't really the words to describe it or articulate it. It was just the sensation of I can't breathe, and it was extremely scary. It was definitely, even though it wasn't very long, I've had panic attacks that have lasted for like an hour, even or so. This was very short. It was only a few minutes, but the intensity of the panic attack was so scary. It was definitely probably the worst panic attack I've ever had in my life. I really thought I was gonna die. I remember at the time I was up, of course, the 3rd floor, and I was like freaking out. I'm like, I'm alone because I'm on the 3rd floor, and I'm thinking that I'm gonna die in this moment. So I went and I opened up the window that was right next to me, and I like got some air, and I was like really hyperventilating really intensely. And then it eventually subsided, but I was pretty shaken up by that. I was like I was shaking, like I was still shaking even after like it was over. And then after that moment happened, it's like it kind of was ingrained in my brain, and I would start to have this like sensation of I can't breathe at random parts of the day. I could be, having a class, and all of a sudden I would just feel like I couldn't breathe. And even though I was technically breathing, it just, somehow I had this weird sensation of, I just wasn't getting enough oxygen. And what would happen was, over time, I would have certain triggers that would really bring it on. So especially exercise. If I ever tried to exercise, like doing push-ups or trying to jog or anything. Stairs were another trigger. Anything that would get my heart pumping, it would trigger that feeling of, oh my God, I can't breathe. And so for years, I couldn't exercise. I couldn't jog. I couldn't do any kind of intense exercise that would get my heart pumping. And this was, really a huge bummer because I had been wanting to get in shape for a long time. And, you can't really get in shape if you can't exercise. And any type of exercise I couldn't do. So this was really severe, and it was very crippling. And it was really crippling to the point to where I couldn't even go up like multiple flights of stairs. Typically one flight of stairs would be okay, depending on how long it was. But if it was 2 flights of stairs, that was usually my trigger. So a lot of times what I would have to do is I would have to go up like the 1 flight, and then I would kind of stop at the first platform. And it could be really embarrassing because in public, you're around people, and sometimes I would just like act like I was on my phone or something like that and pretend I would, I had something to do. And yeah, I'd have to wait for like a minute, and then I'd go back. I might go up, but still, I would still get triggered sometimes, even if I took a really slow time to do it, and I would still end up going into like this kind of like panic. And it was really bad. Like if I was walking with somebody, I would try to hide it. So I would do those 2 flights of stairs without stopping. And I would immediately I would start to hyperventilate, and I would try to mask it. I would try to hide it, but it would be really hard. And so this really affected me in so many aspects of life. So like I said, I couldn't exercise. I couldn't go up more than 2 flights of stairs at a time. I couldn't hike. Like if my family ever wanted to go out hiking, forget it. I would go, but like there were times where if we ever went to an area that was hilly, I would have to take a really slow time going up that hill. But I would still end up having like triggers, and I would start like having these like panic attacks. And what I would do was, when I had the panic attack, I would like lift my my neck up like that to like it would just make me feel like I was getting in more air that way. And then of course, like if somebody saw me like doing that, like, oh my gosh, like what's going on? Like they'd be really concerned. And so like I said, this happened for like 4 years. 4 years of my life that I couldn't go up 2 flights of stairs. I couldn't even walk up a hill. I couldn't, I would exercise a little bit, but like I'd have to be really, really careful to not trigger myself to get to the point of like my heart's racing too much. So this was a really, really crippling anxiety. And, it was really keeping me from living my life because, at my job, I work at a place where, there's multiple floors, and it's like, you got to go up 2 flights of stairs to get someplace. And it's just really crippling to have to like do what I was doing and always, have to stop midway. And at some point you just don't feel normal anymore. You don't feel like a normal human being. And so you can imagine, dealing with this for years on end. At some point you really get sick and tired of it. You just want to be normal again. You just want to like walk to places without having to stop midway and like go through all these rituals and all this stuff. And so what I did was I started conducting some research about this, because I really wanted to get to the bottom of what's causing me to feel like I'm not getting enough air. I've had multiple tests done. My oxygen levels are fine. My heart rate is fine. My heart is fine. So then what gives? And through my research and trial and error, I basically discovered that I was breathing in too much air. So that might sound kind of ironic because, how can you breathe in too much air? But when I began to really become aware of my breathing habits, what I would see is that, like, for example, like if I was going up those flight of stairs, that I would do this kind of weird thing where before I even reach the stairs, I'd be like, I would just be like breathing in, like very deeply kind of breathing in air, preemptively before I got to the stairs, as if I was already out of breath. And over time, what I began to discover was that this kind of preemptive, like breathing, sucking in air, like really deeply, obsessively, was somehow leading to me having that feeling of being out of breath once I began to exert myself. So what I had to do was start training myself to not do that, basically to not over breathe. And so basically the way that we overcome air hunger is through retraining our breathing patterns. So as people who have suffered with anxiety, we have this tendency subconsciously to kind of hurriedly like take in a really deep breath kind of multiple times over, like, you know, because we're anxious, and that taking in the breath, it falsely comforts us. There's something about taking in a deep breath that it makes us feel safer, but the way that we're doing it, it's counterproductive to our breathing system, if that's what we want to say. Basically, because of our anxiety, we've lost that natural rhythm of breathing. So, of course, breathing is not something that you have to think about. It's an instinct, right? But what happens is people who suffer with anxiety, they start to overthink their breathing. And so the breathing really loses its natural flow. And so we develop all these really like weird breathing patterns, and we're kind of throwing off our oxygen levels. And pretty much what I have found through research and trial and error with my own body, like I said, really retraining my breathing patterns. And so let's use the stairs for an example, because what I would do is I would start to like preemptively take all these like really deep breaths before I took the stairs, and then it would like start to make me hyperventilate. What I had to learn really was to calm my breathing, and it's more about taking shallow breaths. So what you don't realize is that at a more of a resting state, we breathe a lot more shallowly. You don't have to take in these really deep breaths. And so it's about learning how to breathe more shallow. And also, what I would do is going up these steps is, so first of all, stop taking all those like deep breaths. That's not necessary. And then once you're going up the steps is allowing yourself to exhale. And what I didn't realize was that naturally, as I'm exerting myself and I'm going up the stairs, naturally my body wants to actually exhale instead of inhale. So as I'm going up, it's just like, okay, it might not be that dramatic, but as I began to let go of these sort of artificial breathing patterns, and I'm going to say artificial, meaning that I made them up because they're not natural to the body. They were out of a process where I was overthinking my breathing patterns. So what I had to learn to do was basically, as I was exerting myself, whether that was exercising or going up those flight of stairs or walking up a hill, was to stop trying to take in all these deep breaths. And this is not to say that we don't take in breaths while we're exerting ourselves, but it's to say that we are over breathing, meaning that we're taking in too deep of a breath. And so what I've found is that through breathing more shallow, allowing myself to exhale like fully as I exert myself, that I was basically able to get rid of these panic attacks where I was starting to hyperventilate and feeling like I couldn't get enough breath. And it was just like, it was just magical. Like the first time it happened, with the place that I work at the first floor, and I have to go up to the second floor to, go to the next place, because I work at two different places in one place, if that makes sense. And, I would have to go upstairs, basically. And so, as I used this kind of new technique of breathing, or maybe, I guess, the original way of breathing, which is to not over-breathe, and to breathe more shallow, and to allow myself to exhale instead of over-inhaling, I would find that as I got up to the top of those stairs, that I wouldn't feel out of breath anymore. Because originally what would happen is when I started to overbreathe so much, I would get up at the top of the steps, and I would feel like really out of breath, and I would be like oh my gosh, I can't breathe. And like I said, I'm not a doctor, so I can't explain the whole mechanism behind it, but all that overbreathing that I was doing was causing me to feel even more out of breath after I exerted myself. So it's very ironic, but it's just, how I've discovered the body works basically. And so, this is all kind of a recent discovery. Like I said, it's been 4 years. And I just started to kind of overcome this about a month ago. And so it wasn't kind of just like, a stroke of luck. I tested it multiple times, go up those flight of stairs, like again and again. And if this wasn't working, like it wouldn't have worked, because like literally every time I went up the stairs, if it was 2 flights of stairs, this would always happen without fail. I would always start to hyperventilate. So, like I said, overcoming this air hunger, it's really in your breathing technique. And, I don't know, maybe there might be a different technique out there for other people, and maybe something different might work for you better. But for me, this is what's working right now, is learning how to actually, instead of, taking the route where because sometimes anxiety sufferers, they tell you to take a deep breath in. And you know what? That was not working for me, the whole taking a deep breath in and holding it. At some point, it didn't work. It worked in the past, but after I developed this air hunger, it didn't work anymore. And what I found was really the opposite, which was learning to actually breathe more shallow, take shorter breaths, not as fast, and to not take the, because essentially what you're doing is, you're trying to take all this air up here in your chest, and it's just, when you do that, you get this feeling of your rib cage just can't expand enough, and you just can't get your, you can't open up your lungs wide enough. And so what I found, really, it's about kind of like almost like riding in some kind of low tide, and getting used to that feeling of, you might kind of feel out of breath a little bit, but what you don't realize is that you've kind of trained your brain over time to see that as an alarm, when really it shouldn't be. And you've trained your brain to basically think that it needs to get more oxygen than it does. And so, of course, I went and I tested it with other things. I went hiking, I walked up hills, I've been, doing more exercises. And, it's not to say, with anxiety, you don't, with any kind of anxiety, you don't typically just like overcome it just overnight. Usually it does take time. It's really a process where you have to train your brain, retrain your brain. So, I mean, there have been a few instances where I've had little like spikes of anxiety, but it's really nothing compared to what I'd have before. Before, it was like, I would really be stuck in this kind of mode of like hyperventilating, and it would take a while to get out of that. So, anybody who suffers with this air hunger, I would really suggest, start with becoming more aware of your breathing patterns, basically. I know that might sound counterintuitive, because for some people they said, the being aware of my breathing made me more anxious. But the thing is that you kind of have to be aware of what's causing you to have that sense of air hunger, so that way you can retrain your way out. And naturally, your brain should start to adapt to that, and that's going to fall back into the subconscious of your mind, and you won't have to overthink it. I mean, at least for me, I had to become aware of the fact that I was taking in all these deep breaths that I didn't need to do. But that is pretty much it in a nutshell. It's really in your breathing patterns, and contrary to what we've been told, a lot of people say, take in deep breaths, hold in those breaths, and, breathe out your nose and all this stuff. And, like I said, that might work for certain people depending on the type of anxiety you have, the type of panic attack you have. But for this particular panic, and I'm gonna say it's particular. It's different because I've had other types of panic attacks. Your whole body is numb, you feel confused, and but this was different because for me, I would feel like fine during the day, and the rest of my life I'd be fine. But once I had that trigger, like going up steps or trying to exercise, it would happen and it would feel so real, and it would feel like, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with my heart. And it's very tricky. It's very tricky because this type of panic disorder makes it feel like you're really something wrong with you. And it's not to say that other kinds of panic attacks don't do that, but in my experience, I feel like this is just a particularly crippling anxiety. But all I can tell you is that once you start to overcome this, it is so freeing. I mean, it might sound silly, but the first time I was able to like go up 2 flights of stairs and not have to rest in between, the first time in 4 years, I just felt like, like my life, I'm finally getting my life back. I can finally walk up the stairs like a normal person. And, if I'm walking with somebody, right, I don't have to like stop and like act like I'm going on my cell phone or something like that. I can, go hiking again and all these things. So it's like, once you start to overcome this, you'll start to get your life back. And so hopefully this video has helped you today. If you have any questions, please leave me a comment. Once again, I am not a doctor. This is just my own experience.